Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. With me is Simon Meyers, producer of I May Destroy You. And, this series is such a product of Michaela Coel because she has so many hats that she wears, from creator, star, writer, director. What was the experience like of meeting her and producing alongside her?
Well, even though, as you say, she wears so many hats, and it is her story of things that have happened to her and people she knows very closely in her recent life, she was very collaborative, as the best showrunners are. So there's a lot of other people's DNA in there as well. So it was just, obviously her writing and her vision, but with an input from several of the rest of us along the way. So it was sometimes collaborations can be a little bit rocky, but this wasn't. It was a very all-inclusive, embracive, inclusive show, and I think that shows with the final product.
And how early in the process did you come on board? Had the scripts already been finished at that point?
The scripts were never finished. Because the scripting was an ongoing process throughout the shoot. I mean, it was a shoot of approximately 90 days, and basically in one block. And what that means, a lot of shows do 4 weeks for 2 episodes, then another 4 weeks for another 2 episodes. We didn't do that. We did 90 days for 12 episodes. And whilst we didn't film a lot from episode 12 in the first couple of weeks, it wasn't chronological like that. So the scripts were an ongoing process. And there were always a couple that we called our delinquent children, that were the ones that we kept going back to, and Michaela would rewrite and would go in this direction, then would go in another direction. So she had been working on the scripts for a couple of years before I read them, and before they were ready to kind of even approach going into pre-production. So it had been a long process for her. And, each draft of the script had lived in her head for a certain amount of time and then been superseded by the next one. She's a great rewriter.
Was there a particular element in the script or something about it that you saw or read and you latched on and said, well, I just have to be involved in this?
Yeah. As soon as I read it, I thought, this voice, I've been waiting to read this voice for years. It's that true, and it's that entertaining and funny at the same time, without getting dragged down into misery and downbeat kind of wallowing, even though it's a serious subject. It was the most enlightening thing I think I'd ever read. And even though the scripts always needed work, I could see that it just had heart and truth.
And it tackles a lot of, all these characters carry around so much trauma, and there's many depictions of assault and issues of consent. How was it tackling issues like that are sensitive, that could be maybe triggering for folks? What were the conversations around those elements?
Well, I mean, obviously we wanted to handle them with tact and sensitivity, but also kind of not pull our punches. So we made very sure that the sex and the assault scenes within the show were well rehearsed, done with an intimacy coordinator, so that everyone was comfortable. We wanted to show the subject that we were talking about without traumatizing the people who were making the show. We had quite a lot of advisors around, making sure that there wasn't, events triggering for members of the crew, because one of the things about the show, when the audience watch it, almost everyone who's watched the show and loved the show can relate to, oh, something like that happened to me or a friend of mine. It was revealed as a very common experience, that something somewhere within those themes of the show has happened to either the audience or somebody that somebody knows. It's common. So we realized that quite early on, like, oh, actually, this isn't niche and unusual. This is really quite commonplace. So we wanted to make sure that it wasn't triggering, and we just did that with a number of advisors who would check around people. And a lot of people said, yeah, no, I'm fine with it. Why are you asking me? But there also were a couple that said, yeah, well, it's made me think a little.
I always wondered because, when I devoured the show, and when people asked me about it, they were like, oh, I've heard about that. What is it? And it's hard to encapsulate that in a log line because it just encompasses so many different elements. And there's groundedness and surrealism, and it covers sexual assault and has a very specific point of view. Was it ever like a hard sell for you? Did you ever encounter people not understanding? What was the process of that?
I mean, not really. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it is probably the only show that's tonally has tackled sexual assault without making the people involved into extreme victims. But also, one of the things that attracted me to it is the sexual assault element of it is what we're talking about, and which is what has sort of grabbed the headlines, if you like. But there is social comment on virtually every aspect of modern life. From veganism to social media to internet dating, almost any of our contemporary subjects are in there, commented on or satirized in some form. And so whilst the assault element of it is kind of higher in the mix, it's a comment on modern society.
Considering how much it does comment on, which you just brought up, what would you say was the most challenging aspect of the production for you?
You mean editorially?
Yeah, or just something that really was a challenge to get right, or to figure out the logistics of, and you're very pleased that you got through it.
There's usually one challenge whenever you have something that is a good script. People have read it and they'll go, oh, this is good. Oh, wow. And that challenge is to make it good on the screen as well as it was in the script. And so to translate some of the power of her writing onto the screen, that was a challenge. That took us time. That took us a lot of thought. There's a lot of care gone into the post-production on the show. So it was to translate the vision from script to screen, which sounds like an obvious thing for every show, but in particular for this one, because it had such a unique tone.
Yeah. And many of the actors who bring this to life are not, these massive household names. Was that always the impetus from the beginning to cast that way? How did you approach the casting process?
Yeah, it was. It was. It didn't feel like a vehicle for household names at all. And some of those actors, it was their first gig. And some of them are mainly theatre actors. There's a couple of people who work mostly in comedy in there. And I think that, obviously our casting director served us well. She found some great people. But it's a tribute to the kind of truth of Michaela's dialogue, that her words come out of their mouths so easily and so believably. There's no forced dialogue. There's no kind of, oh, that line's in there. Well, that character probably wouldn't say that, but we need to know that because of something else in the plot. We didn't do any of that. It's all natural. And that's why it feels so natural, I think.
Yeah. I think a lot of, one of the main reasons they can give such fascinating performances in this is because everyone encompasses such a gray area. I don't know that there's anyone who is like 100% never does anything wrong or makes any mistakes in the show, which is interesting to watch. What did you think about that element of the scripts?
That's one of the things that makes it interesting. There are no goodies and baddies. It's the gray areas in between that are interesting. As Michaela herself said, even my angels have horns and my devils have wings. And you can see that throughout. And that's what, because that's what society is like. Obviously, I'm sure there are heroes and villains, but most of us exist within the gray areas in between.
And then we literally see the angel with horns in her Halloween costume. in that one episode.
Yeah.
You are also, in addition to being a producer in your career, you also direct. How do you think sort of your experience as a director helped you as a producer?
I think if you've lived a life as a director before you become a producer, you know what the director's thinking. The only other person on the set that knows what the director's thinking is me, being an ex-director. So I like, okay, I understand why you need that or you want that. I'll fight for that for you and we'll make sure you get that. Or with love and respect, I do understand why you need that, but we can't do it. So there are always those occasions where you can give and those occasions where you can't. But it also, the other fundamental thing that having directed gives you is an appreciation of the way the story is told and the way the director is telling the story. And you'd think that would be fundamental, but actually it is something that people who've been involved in direction on the floor can bring to it.
This one you are not directing. Is there something specific that grabs you and makes you want to solely produce something versus both direct and produce it?
Well, I think it maybe works slightly differently on both sides of the pond. But generally over here, the producer will oversee everything from script process to production to post-production. Quite often on shows, there's more than one director. Okay, there wasn't on this one, but quite often there is. So it's more of a kind of an overview role where you're looking after the whole thing rather than just directing a smaller part of it. So for me, it's something that I sort of gravitated towards as I got a few more miles on the clock. And it's just more satisfying to be part of the whole thing rather than a smaller chunk of it.
And do you look out for specific projects of like a specific topic you want to tackle? How do you go sifting through projects like that?
I don't really. I rarely look for a specific project I want to tackle. I look for truth and interesting writing. It's the writing. It's like, I've done cop shows which I've enjoyed, but they don't particularly have anything to say. I much prefer writing like this. And there's an increasing amount of it around these days where even if it is a cop show, it has something to say. There's something that it's giving you as its view, as its voice. That's what I look for. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a lifestyle piece. The thing I'm doing at the moment is a more corporate drama piece or a fantasy piece. It's the writing and whether it's well written within the genre. That's for me. That's where it starts.
Yeah, good. A good point of view is always good. This show is I May Destroy You, I think, has been really well received across both audiences and critics, which is not always, sometimes you often just get one or the other and not both, but this one has really, I think, been well received. So I'm just curious, what has the experience been like watching everyone devour this show, and what has your experience been like watching the audience's feedback?
Well, it's interesting because as we were making it, we were thinking, is this a niche piece that is going to kind of hit with its obvious targeted audience who are, similar to the characters in the show in terms of background and age. And I always felt that it was actually much more mainstream than that, but not everyone on the show felt that. And I was, this is not just me saying, hey, I'm right. But it did turn out that what was great was that the show found an audience way beyond the targeted audience in terms of age group and experience. It reaches from much younger to the point where you're thinking, oh, those people are almost too young to be watching this show, to people in their 70s and 80s who've been saying, we've been waiting for a show like this, who are not at all put off by the truth, not at all put off by the language, and are just, very welcoming of something as faithful to the life experience that we know other people have had.
Well, I think it's certainly been well embraced, and I can see why. So Simon, fantastic job on the show. Can't wait to see what else is next for you. So if everyone's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. And Simon, thank you once again for sitting down with me.
Cheers.